AITA for being so impossible to date that someone literally paid a guy to pretend to like me? Throwaway account because if anyone from my high school reads this, they'll know exactly who I am. I honestly don't know if I was the problem here. Like, I know I'm not exactly everyone's favorite person. I've been called intimidating, difficult, antisocial, aggressive, a heinous bitch. That last one was by my guidance counselor, by the way. She smiled while saying it, which somehow made it worse. So maybe I deserve some criticism, but I still don't think I deserve this. This whole mess started because my little sister was too pretty for her own good, and my dad was too paranoid to let her date. Sounds unrelated. It wasn't. For context, my sister and I could not be more different if we tried. She's the kind of person who walks through school, and somehow everyone knows her name. Teachers adore her. Girls want to be her. Guys practically trip over themselves trying to talk to her. Meanwhile, I accidentally bumped into a freshman with a skateboard one morning. Actually, he hit me. I spilled coffee all over myself. My backpack exploded across the parking lot, and this poor kid started apologizing while trying to help pick everything up. I told him to leave it alone. He didn't. So I may or may not have pinned him against a parked car with his own skateboard. Not my proudest moment. Also not the first rumor people spread about me that week. By the time I walked into school, the hallway had literally parted like I was some kind of supervillain. Honestly, it saved time. People always assume I woke up one day and decided I hated everyone. Not exactly. I just got really tired of pretending to like people who spent their entire lives trying to impress each other. My English class was basically Exhibit A. We were discussing yet another book written by yet another dead guy everyone insisted was a genius. I made the mistake of asking why we never read women authors instead. Apparently questioning the curriculum is a crime. One of the football players immediately called me a bitter hag with no friends. Original. The class laughed. The teacher looked like she wanted to disappear into another dimension. Meanwhile, I kept talking because honestly, if nobody says anything, nothing ever changes. 5 minutes later, I was sitting in the guidance counselor's office. Again. She looked at my file, sighed dramatically, and basically asked why I insisted on terrorizing the faculty. I told her expressing an opinion wasn't terrorism. She wasn't convinced. Then she reminded me about some guy's unfortunate incident involving his own anatomy. Long story. Technically, I still maintain he injured himself. I was just nearby. Apparently, that's not how witnesses work. Eventually, she leaned back and said people found me, let's say, extremely unpleasant. She suggested I work on my personality. I thanked her for the excellent guidance in the most fake, customer service voice I could manage and left. School wasn't much better outside her office. Everywhere I looked, everyone was obsessed with the same things. Who's dating who? Who's wearing what? Who's going to prom? Who's popular? Meanwhile, my best friend was skipping gym to secretly sit in sophomore English because she was hopelessly obsessed with Shakespeare. Yes, the guy who's been dead for centuries. I told her maybe therapy would be cheaper than haunting herself for a playwright. She disagreed. Our conversations were unique. Then there was my sister. Imagine living with someone whose biggest daily crisis is whether Joey, the local human protein shake with perfect hair, said hi to her in the hallway. That was Bianca. She lived for attention. The annoying part? She barely had to try. She could smile at someone and suddenly they'd remember it for the next 3 months. I couldn't smile without someone wondering who I was about to insult. Now here's where everything actually started. My dad. Love him. But he spent every single day delivering babies, which meant he had developed an almost supernatural fear of teenagers dating, especially daughters. His parenting philosophy basically boiled down to no boys. Ever. Bianca begged to go on dates, constantly. Dad's answer was always no. Then one night she complained again. He thought about it for exactly 3 seconds before making the worst parenting decision I've ever witnessed. He announced, Bianca can date when Kat dates. Silence. Then everyone looked at me, including me. I nearly laughed, because that wasn't happening. Ever. I had absolutely zero interest in dating anyone at school. Most of the guys acted like being able to bench press another human being counted as a personality. The rest were much better. So my sister completely lost it. She called me a mutant. I reminded everyone her diary was basically a scrapbook dedicated to hair products. Dad ended the argument by playing an actual audio recording of a 15-year-old girl in labor. Apparently, that was supposed to discourage dating. Honestly, it kind of worked. From that moment on, I became public enemy number 1. Not because I'd done anything new, but because I had accidentally become the reason the most popular girl in school couldn't date. Which meant every guy who wanted Bianca suddenly had one problem. Me. I didn't realize it yet. I just noticed people staring more than usual, whispering, watching me in the hall. At first I assumed someone had started another ridiculous rumor. I wish it had only been that. Around the same time, I started noticing this one guy, Patrick Verona. If you've ever met someone who looks like trouble before they even open their mouth, that was him. Nobody seemed to know anything factual about him. Every story was somehow crazier than the last. Apparently, he'd disappeared for a year. Some people said he'd been in prison. Others swore he'd worked for a rock band. Someone even claimed he'd sold one of his organs. Honestly, half the school probably believed all three. I didn't care enough to ask. He just looked like another guy trying way too hard to seem mysterious. Leather jacket, permanent smirk, old beat-up Jeep. The kind of person teachers already expected the worst from. We crossed paths a few times. Never really spoke. I figured that would be the end of it. Looking back, that was probably the last peaceful week of my senior year. Because somewhere else in school, without me knowing, a brand new transfer student had fallen for my sister. Another guy wanted to date her. Another popular idiot wanted her all to himself. And somehow, all of them came to exactly the same conclusion. The only thing standing between them and Bianca was me. And instead of talking to me like normal human beings, they came up with a plan that was so unbelievably stupid. It actually worked. But I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that a guy with a dangerous reputation had suddenly started paying way too much attention to me. And, trust me, that wasn't even the weirdest part. So, apparently, while I was just trying to survive senior year without strangling anyone, there were multiple guys holding strategy meetings about my love life. I wish I was joking. I found this out much later, obviously. At the time, all I noticed was that Patrick Verona suddenly kept appearing everywhere. The hallway, the parking lot, outside practice. It felt less like coincidence and more like my life had developed a very sarcastic stalker. The first time he actually tried talking to me, I'd just finished field hockey practice. I was sweaty, exhausted, and in absolutely no mood for conversation. Out of nowhere I hear, "Hey, girly." I stopped, turned around, looked at him. He immediately corrected himself to woman, which I guess was supposed to earn him points. It didn't. He asked how I was doing. I told him I was sweating like a pig. Then I asked how he was. He grinned like we'd known each other for years. I remember thinking, who is this guy? Because he acted like the fact that I'd ignored him every previous time somehow meant we were making progress. Then, he just casually informed me he was picking me up Friday. Not, would you like to? Not, are you free? Just, Friday. Bold strategy. Asked where exactly he planned on taking me. The local convenience store? Did he even know my name? He claimed he knew plenty about me. I seriously doubted that. So I walked away. He yelled something about me not being much of a bargain either. Honestly, fair enough. Most people would have taken that rejection as a sign to move on. Patrick apparently saw it as Act 1. A few days later he cornered me at my locker. Again, he asked if I hated him. I told him I didn't think he was important enough to deserve that much emotion. Maybe a little harsh. Still accurate. He invited me to the racetrack. Started describing cheap beer, horse racing, and somehow worked in the phrase, my hand on your ass. Romantic. I told him the only thing ending up on him would be my vomit. Then I left. Again. At this point, I figured he'd eventually get bored. Spoiler. He didn't. One night, I was leaving my favorite record store with a bag full of new CDs. My hands were full. I was digging around for my car keys, and suddenly there he was, sitting on the hood of my car, like that was a completely normal thing people did. He complimented my ancient car. I asked if he was following me. He claimed he'd just happened to be at the laundromat nearby. Sure. What incredible luck. Before I could leave, another problem showed up. Joey. Remember him? The walking jawline who treated mirrors like close friends. He pulled his ridiculously expensive sports car behind mine and blocked me in while he wandered into a liquor store with his friends. Asked if he'd mind moving. He basically said, nope, then walked away. So, I considered my options. Wait politely, or teach him a valuable lesson about parking etiquette. Guess which one I chose. I threw my car into reverse. Crunch. Right into the side of his precious sports car. The sound was, honestly, kind of satisfying. Patrick burst out laughing. Joey came sprinting out of the store screaming at me. So naturally, I backed into his car again. On purpose. Then smiled. Very politely. Look, I'm not saying it was mature. I'm saying, I'd do it again. Unfortunately, my father disagreed. Apparently insurance companies don't accept he deserved it as an official explanation. Who knew? Dad asked if I was acting out because he wouldn't let me leave for the college I wanted. I asked if maybe he was the one punishing me. He insisted parents had the right to make decisions. I reminded him I was 18. He reminded me that 18-year-olds apparently know nothing. Our conversation ended the way most conversations in my house ended. His pager went off because another baby had decided it was time to enter the world. He grabbed his bag, walked out. Argument unfinished. Again. I hated when that happened. Not because babies were inconsiderate. Okay, maybe a little because babies were inconsiderate. Mostly because it meant nobody ever actually listened. The next week things got weird. Patrick stopped acting like every other guy at school. He wasn't trying to impress his friends. He wasn't showing off. He just kept trying. And somehow that was even more suspicious. Then one afternoon he showed up at my locker. Again. At this point, I was starting to wonder if he'd memorized my schedule. He asked me out one more time. I shot him down one more time. Nothing new there. Except, He didn't seem embarrassed. He just smiled like someone who knew something I didn't. That smile should have worried me. Around the same time, my sister became absolutely obsessed with one specific goal: getting me to date. Which, considering she'd spent years making fun of me for not dating, felt suspicious. She kept casually asking questions. What kind of guys do you like? Would you ever go to Bogey's party? Don't you think Patrick's kind of cute? Subtle. Very subtle. Meanwhile, Dad was still enforcing his brilliant dating policy, which meant Bianca still couldn't go out, which meant everyone else's plans were still stuck because of me. Again, no pressure. Then something happened that genuinely caught me off guard. Patrick stopped trying to flirt. Seriously. No cheesy lines. No fake confidence. Nothing. Instead, he showed up at a concert. My concert. Not one of those giant mainstream bands everyone pretended to like. This was an indie punk show. The kind of music 99% of my classmates would have called angry screaming. I went with my best friend. We danced. We screamed every lyric. For the first time in weeks, I actually forgot school existed. I forgot people were watching me. I forgot I had a reputation. I was just happy, which apparently someone noticed. I went to grab water between songs. Guess who was standing at the bar? Patrick. Of course. I rolled my eyes so hard I nearly saw my own brain. I walked over and accused him of pretending to like the band just to impress me. He looked genuinely confused. Then, instead of talking about me, he started talking about the music. Not fake opinions. Real ones. He started naming bands almost nobody at school had even heard of. Bands I listened to. I remember just staring at him. Because, how the hell did this guy know that? Was this some elaborate performance? Did he memorize indie music just to get one date? Who does that? Then he leaned closer. Not in a creepy way. Just enough that I could hear him over the music. He said he'd been watching me dance. And, this is embarrassing to admit, he didn't make fun of me. He said he'd never seen me look that happy. No jokes. No sarcasm. Just honest. For some reason, that hit me harder than any pickup line ever could. I stepped back before he noticed I was blushing. Because absolutely not. That wasn't happening. Not to me. Not because of him. He paid for my drinks before I even realized I'd forgotten. Then he asked me to a party. Again. The band started playing before I answered. I honestly don't know if he even heard me. Maybe that was for the best. Because for the first time, I didn't immediately want to say no. And that scared me way more than it should have. Walking back to my car afterward, my friend kept asking if Patrick had finally gotten through to me. I laughed it off. Said I didn't care. Said I was only thinking about how good the concert had been. She didn't believe me. Honestly, neither did I. Because somewhere between insulting each other, crashing into sports cars, and arguing over punk music, I'd started wondering something I never thought I'd ask myself. What if this guy wasn't pretending? Unfortunately, someone definitely was. And I was about to find out exactly how expensive my heart had become. So, after that concert, I kept telling myself I was overthinking everything. Patrick had been surprisingly normal for one night. Big deal. People have good days. It didn't mean anything, right? Yeah. I didn't believe myself either. The annoying part was that he stopped acting like every other guy I'd ever met. Normally, when someone flirted with me and got rejected, they'd either give up or call me names. Patrick just kept showing up. Not constantly. Not in an obsessive way. Just enough that it felt intentional. Like he actually wanted to know me. Which, honestly, was suspicious enough on its own. A few days later, he caught me outside school again. This time, he wasn't trying to impress me with some ridiculous pickup line. He just talked about books, music, college, my car, literally whatever came up. Half the time we argued. The other half we somehow ended up laughing. I hated how easy it was becoming. Not because I disliked him. Because I was starting not to. That was a much bigger problem. See, people assume I hated dating. That's not true. I hated pretending. I hated fake people. Fake conversations. Fake compliments. Fake popularity. Patrick didn't really seem fake. Cocky? Definitely. Annoying? Without question. But fake? I couldn't quite convince myself anymore. Then he asked me to Bogey's party. Again. I don't know why. Maybe it was the concert. Maybe it was the fact that he'd actually listened instead of talking over me. Maybe I was just tired of saying no. Whatever the reason, I surprised both of us. I said yes. The look on his face was almost worth it. He genuinely hadn't expected me to agree. Honestly, neither had I. The problem was, I don't do parties. At least, not those parties. You know the type. Someone's parents leave town. 300 teenagers magically appear. Half of them are already drunk before sunset. The backyard smells like cheap beer and bad decisions. Exactly my kind of nightmare. Patrick picked me up anyway. And before we even got there, he pulled over. I remember thinking, great. This is where things get weird. Instead, he handed me the steering wheel. He wanted me to drive his car. I asked if he'd lost his mind. He just shrugged, said he trusted me, which was honestly kind of terrifying. Most people barely trusted me with a conversation. This guy trusted me with his truck. We drove around for a while. No agenda. No pressure. Just talking. He asked why I always acted like I expected everyone to disappoint me. I laughed. Mostly because I didn't have a good answer. When we finally got to the party, it was exactly as awful as I expected. Music blasting. People jumping into the pool fully clothed. Someone trying to light something on fire. Classic suburban elegance. Bianca was already there, which immediately confused me, because she wasn't supposed to be there unless. Then it hit me. She'd snuck out. I almost admired the commitment. Almost. For the first hour, things were surprisingly okay. Patrick stayed with me. Didn't ditch me to impress his friends. Didn't try anything. We wandered around making fun of people. Honestly, it was kind of fun. Which should have been my first warning. Whenever life starts feeling comfortable, something stupid is usually about to happen. In my case, that stupid thing came in a red plastic cup. I don't drink. Mostly because I like remembering my own decisions. That night, I made an exception. One drink became two. Then, I honestly stopped counting. Huge mistake. Massive. Olympic-level mistake. The next thing I remember, I'm standing on top of a table, dancing, in front of basically the entire party. Now, I need everyone reading this to understand something. I would rather write an apology letter to every person I've ever insulted than dance on a table in public. Yet there I was, living my worst nightmare, and apparently enjoying it, for about 30 seconds. Then everything started spinning. I leaned over and threw up everywhere, mostly on Patrick. So, if anyone was keeping score, he finally got covered in my vomit. Exactly like I'd promised. I hate when I'm accidentally right. I was mortified. Absolutely horrified. I wanted the ground to open up and swallow me. Instead, Patrick just helped me outside. No jokes. No complaints. No, I told you so. He sat with me while I tried convincing the sidewalk to stop moving. Then, without making a big deal out of it, he kissed me. Just once. Soft. Simple. Completely unexpected. For a second, everything else disappeared. The party. The noise. My embarrassment. It was just quiet. And then my brain caught up. I panicked, obviously, because that's what I do best. I pushed him away, told him I had to go. Then I left. The next morning was somehow even worse. Not because of the hangover, although that definitely didn't help. No. The worst part was realizing I couldn't stop thinking about him. I'd spent years convincing myself relationships were pointless. That guys only wanted one thing, that nobody actually saw me. Then one ridiculously stubborn idiot comes along, and suddenly I don't know what I believe anymore. Meanwhile, things at school were getting messy. Bianca had started seeing Cameron. Joey had absolutely noticed. And judging by the way he kept glaring at everyone, he wasn't taking rejection very well. Honestly, he looked less like a heartbroken guy and more like someone planning a lawsuit. Patrick and I kept getting closer. He took me to do paintball. We argued about music. He somehow convinced me to laugh more than once. I even caught myself smiling when I saw his truck in the parking lot, which if you told me a month earlier, I would have assumed you were hallucinating. Then one afternoon, we ended up sitting together after school. No distractions. No sarcastic comments. Just silence. Comfortable silence. The kind that's weirdly rare. He asked me why I'd changed so much after my freshman year. I'd spent years avoiding that question. I finally answered it. Back then, I'd trusted the wrong people. I let popularity decide who my friends were. I ignored my instincts. I got hurt. Really hurt. After that, I stopped trying. Stopped pretending. Stopped caring whether people liked me. It was easier that way. Safer. Patrick didn't interrupt. Didn't tell me to look on the bright side. He just listened. Honestly, that might have been the moment I started falling for him. Not the kiss. Not the flirting. Just being heard. I wish I could tell you that's where things finally got better. I really do. Instead, someone else finally decided it was time to tell the truth. And that truth was worth exactly $300. So, $300. That's apparently what my trust was worth. I wish I were exaggerating. I wasn't. Everything started falling apart in the most ridiculous way possible. I was actually happy. Not all the time. I'm still me. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to keep everyone at arm's length. Patrick had somehow become the one person I could just exist around. No pretending. No arguing for the sake of arguing. No trying to prove I was smarter than everyone else. Just peace. Which, looking back, should have terrified me. Because every time I let my guard down, life found a new way to remind me why I built those walls in the first place. Prom season rolled around. The entire school suddenly acted like one overpriced dance would determine the rest of their lives. Meanwhile, I still thought tuxedos looked uncomfortable and limousines were just expensive traffic. Then Patrick asked me to prom. Actually, he didn't even really ask. He just looked at me with that stupid little smile and said he'd like me there. Somehow, that was enough. Against all logic, I said yes. Again. I remember getting home and just staring at myself in the mirror wondering what was happening. A month ago, I would have laughed if someone suggested I'd willingly go to prom. Now, I was actually excited. I hated admitting that. My sister nearly fainted. She'd spent years trying to convince me I wasn't allergic to fun. Apparently, she'd finally won. Dad. Well, Dad reacted exactly the way you'd expect. He interrogated Patrick like he was applying for federal security clearance. Threatened him approximately 12 different ways. Embarrassed everyone involved. Normal family stuff. Patrick somehow survived. I honestly think Dad respected him a little for not running away. The night of prom was kind of perfect. I know. I hate how cheesy that sounds. But it was. Patrick cleaned up ridiculously well, which was honestly unfair. Bianca kept smiling at me like she'd accomplished some lifelong mission. Even Dad looked weirdly emotional before pretending he wasn't. For once, our family actually looked normal. The dance itself was exactly what you'd expect. Terrible decorations. Questionable music. Teachers pretending they weren't supervising. Teenagers pretending they were adults. But none of that really mattered, because I spent almost the whole night with Patrick. We danced. We laughed. We made fun of everyone else's dancing. I actually forgot to be cynical. If you know me, that's basically a miracle. Then Joey showed up, looking smug, which is never a good sign. He cornered Cameron, started running his mouth. Something about money, something about deals. At first I ignored it. Then I heard Patrick's name. My stomach dropped. You ever have one of those moments where your brain hears something but refuses to process it? That was me. I walked closer. I probably shouldn't have, but I did. And then, I heard everything. Not all at once. Just enough. Enough to understand. Enough to completely destroy the last few months. Someone had paid Patrick to date me. Not because he liked me. Not because he wanted to know me. Because I was an obstacle. A problem. A job. $300. That was the original deal. I honestly don't remember walking away. I just remember the feeling. Like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out every stupid little bit of hope I'd let myself have. Every compliment he'd given me. Every conversation. Every laugh. Every moment. Suddenly, I was questioning all of it. Was any of it real? Or had I just been easy to fool? Patrick chased after me. Of course he did. He kept trying to explain. Said things had changed. Said it wasn't like that anymore. Said he hadn't expected to actually fall for me. And maybe that was true. But here's the thing. When you've spent years believing people eventually disappoint you, finding out your boyfriend literally started dating you because someone paid him doesn't exactly inspire confidence. I told him to leave me alone. This time he actually did. The next few days were awful. I stopped answering calls. Skipped anything I didn't absolutely have to attend. Buried myself in books. Music. Anything that didn't involve thinking. Bianca tried talking to me. "You snacked here." Then felt guilty. Then snapped again. Classic emotional maturity. Even my guidance counselor noticed, which says a lot. She asked if I wanted to talk. I told her absolutely not. She looked almost proud. Apparently, I was making progress. Therapists are weird. Graduation came. I wasn't exactly in the mood to celebrate. Everyone else was talking about college, the future, summer. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop replaying every conversation Patrick and I had ever had, trying to figure out which parts were real, which parts were purchased. It was exhausting. Then came the student awards, completely routine, until they called my name. Apparently, I'd won an award for writing. I walked onto the stage, accepted the envelope, sat back down. Inside was a check and a note, short, handwritten, from Patrick. He'd returned the money, every cent, $300, plus interest. There was one sentence that hit me harder than anything else. He wrote that he was sorry and that he couldn't buy back the time we'd lost, but he could at least give back the reason we'd met. I stared at that note for what felt like hours. Then my English teacher announced we'd each written one final poem. Mine was first. Fantastic. Exactly what every emotionally unstable teenager wants. A microphone. I walked to the front of the room, pulled out my paper, started reading. At first it sounded like another sarcastic rant, the kind everyone expected from me. Then it wasn't. I admitted everything I'd been trying not to feel, that I hated how he'd smiled, how he'd talked, how he'd understood me, how he'd made me care, and most of all, how much I hated that losing him hurt so much. By the time I reached the end, I couldn't even finish without crying. Full-on ugly crying. In class. In front of everyone. So much for maintaining the terrifying reputation. Nobody laughed. Nobody said anything. It was just quiet. Later that day, I found Patrick outside, standing by that beat-up truck I'd secretly grown to like. Neither of us spoke for a second. Finally, I walked over. He looked like he expected me to yell. Honestly, I almost did. Instead, I kissed him. Not because everything was magically fixed. It wasn't. Trust doesn't come back in one conversation. But sometimes people make terrible decisions before they become better people. And if I wanted people to believe I wasn't permanently defined by my worst mistakes, maybe I had to believe the same thing about someone else. A few months later, Bianca left for college. I finally got to go to the university I'd wanted all along. Dad slowly accepted that locking his daughters in the house forever wasn't a realistic retirement plan. And Patrick? He's still the most irritating person I've ever willingly kissed. So, Reddit, was I an idiot for giving him another chance? Should I have walked away the second I found out how we met? Or is it possible for something that started for all the wrong reasons to become completely real? I honestly still don't know. Maybe love isn't about perfect beginnings. Maybe it's about what people choose once they finally stop pretending. Clapperboard movie reveal. This story was actually the plot of 10 Things I Hate About You. Could you guess the movie before the reveal? If you enjoyed this Reddit-style movie retelling, subscribe to NarrafyOwl and comment which movie you'd like me to rewrite next, or suggest an alternate ending, and it might become the next video.